So I think that kind of, I don't know if that answers your question directly, Dick, but it's not just, it's principally Sharia law is the Quran and the Hadiths, but they don't cover everything.
Well, when you read about and hear about, if someone steals, they chop off
Right.
a hand.
Yep.
Steals again, they chop off the other.
Yep.
If a person is, sexually abused or raped by someone, she ends up getting buried 4 feet in the ground and gets stoned to death, and the guy that did it goes about his merry way, or that kind of thing.
Yep.
That's part of Sharia law?
Yep. Yeah.
Maybe that would have some effect on those kind of crimes.
Would it be a deterrent? Yes. If you got your hand cut off, probably. We'd have to study that. We'd have to study that in those kind of cultures. We do studies related to the death penalty here. Unfortunately, most murders in this country are crimes of passion, so they don't tend to change that much with that kind of deterrence. But man, I think I'd be thinking twice if I was breaking into unless I was on drugs or something and needed the money for that. I would think twice if I'm breaking into a store. Yeah, Sharia law comes principally out of the Quran and the Sunnah, but it doesn't cover everything. So these are some other indications. The ijtihad and the ijma are other ways that Sharia law has gotten developed over time. And there's a whole legal body, and there's, I don't want to get too lost in that, but in the next chapter you see Sunni Islam, which constitutes 85% of the world's Muslims, is the orthodox tradition. Sunnis rely heavily on these 4 sources of law, though different sources are emphasized in different countries. This is where I might lose you a little bit. For example, the Hanafite school, which most Turks follow, still allows relative freedom to use reasonable judgment. That sounds like the Turks, doesn't it? It's a much more progressive country in that regard. On the other hand, the Hanbalite school, which is followed in Saudi Arabia, holds to the traditional principle strictly. Again, there's 4 schools of thought. I won't put them up on the board. It won't be on the test, so you don't have to worry about them. But those are 4 schools of thought, and you can pick one or the other as a country and how you're going to follow them. But the idea is to have some sort of school that you're following and some sort of self-prescription that you're giving to the people in your country, so that there's some understanding of what it means. Again, I think as the Islamist revolution is happening in our world, and countries are really struggling with what kind of law they're going to follow, all of these things are being debated fiercely. How strict should we be? How much leeway should we have for one's own good judgment? Yes?
So what about those Muslims who are not living in Islamic countries? Muslims in America, do they, within their own culture, do they?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that one. I do know that they wrestle mightily with that. Why don't you do a little research and report back? That'd be good. She says, is it likely that they're like American Indians? Maybe. I think it probably is dependent on the local, the imam that you belong, some mosque that you go to, the imam. The imam varies widely too in terms of how much power. Basically, an imam is a leader or a guide. It's not officially a cleric because they don't have pastors like we have pastors. But yet, it's some sort of guide. And in some traditions, the imam has a lot more power and influence than in others, in terms of being a teacher, in terms of being a preacher that stirs people up. But I think you can imagine them coming to this country, and a lot of the old traditions get brought with them. A lot of the old customs get brought with them. But I don't think there's necessarily a hard and fast rule, but it probably depends on the tradition out of which you came. Just like it probably did for Americans when they came here.
Some of them do take our culture and our dress, and some, retain their same dress that they came with. But the one person that I know of that had changed to our culture and dress came in to work in jeans. And somebody asked her what would happen if she went back to her country like that, and she said they would kill them.
Okay. And do you know where she was from?
No, I don't.
Did everybody hear that? There was a woman that that was from another country and came here and went to work, and she wore jeans. And what would happen if you wore jeans in the country where you came from? And she said, I would be killed. You know, so obviously she came from a very conservative country, maybe like Saudi Arabia, maybe like Iran, that was interpreting Sharia law very conservatively. She was from a school of thought, perhaps the Hannibalite, that was holding to tradition very strictly. Yeah, not from Turkey. That would not have been a problem in Turkey. So again, it varies widely depending on the country and the place, and perhaps, you know, you mentioned Libya. Perhaps what part of Libya you're in. You know, if you're in a more progressive city, people act differently than they do in the country, and it's that way here too, to some extent, isn't it?
Keep in mind that when you're saying Turkey, there's a split of that phosphorus almost, because Istanbul is European. That's what you're talking about.
Okay.
But now in Eastern Turkey, you're still talking about the traditional.
Sure. Well, we saw that when we got into Iraq, and look at all the variety within Iraq and the Kurds in the north. Absolutely. And what's the majority? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go on. The way I understand it, when it comes to the law, there are 5 categories, and I thought we should at least put them up there in terms of, okay, what's required or what's allowed by the law. And the first one is commanded. The second one is, let me write this down, forbidden. The third one is recommended. The fourth one is discouraged. And the fifth one is neutral. Boy, don't you just wish for a few neutrals from time to time. Again, we have 4 schools of thought, so they're going to interpret these differently. But let's just start with an easy one. Bacon cheeseburger. What do you think? Where does it fit here? Forbidden, because it's pork. Okay, so that one's an easy one. Okay, how about the veil?
Recommended.
Depends on the school of thought and how it's interpreted. Most of you are saying recommended.
Could be commanded.
Commanded, yeah, the school of thought. Some are going to say the veil is recommended because you read it and you're interpreting, aren't you? And some people are going to say commanded. It sounds commanded. Depends on how you read those verses, isn't it? Let's go to a different one. Blue jeans.
Forbidden.
Under the burqa or not? That's a good question. Look at technicalities in this room.
There you go.
The burqa, what do you think? Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. It's easy enough to say discouraged. It doesn't probably, it's not forbidden. I mean, they couldn't even imagine the world of blue jeans for women. Okay. Forbidden, because it's not a cloak. Yeah. It's being interpreted in her country, then it's definitely forbidden. Definitely. So it's somewhere between discouraged and forbidden, depending on the school of thought. All right, very good. You're all becoming Islamic scholars. That was easy. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Let's go on to that last paragraph of this section. Today, the Sharia is gaining importance in the consciousness of many Muslims and in the legal systems of individual Islamic communities. Some groups, especially called fundamentalists or Islamists, energetically promote the conviction that the entire life of Muslims and society as a whole must be ordered according to God's right guidance or Sharia. This has led to intensive intellectual and political effort, but also to vehement arguments within the Islamic world. I don't think we could begin to know how much they're fighting about these things. We can't appreciate it, but it's huge. it's huge. There'll be some things I give you next week that will, I think, highlight some of those arguments that are going on in something as specific as suicide bombing. We think it sounds like a unilateral, well, most people are looking the other way, but it's not that way at all. There's been large amounts of condemnation from widespread elements of the Muslim faith. We just don't hear it. We don't hear it, we don't read it on the internet, but it's there. And so we'll read some things and talk about that next week and the week after.
Bert?
Yep.
I think the concern that you hear about is with the radical Islamics.
Yep.
So the question is, who are they? Are they made up of a lot of different flavors also?
Absolutely.
If they are, well then, you know, and they're apparently a small percentage of the full number of Muslims, which is huge.
Yeah. We'll get to that in great detail in the fourth section. The whole of the fourth section is on the more radical elements of this. I want to give more of a base now, but we will certainly get to that because I care deeply about that. And all of us do. All of us are concerned about that.
See, we would get a lot more concerned about burqas and cloaks in this country if we started having a whole rash of suicide bombers by females.
Yeah, exactly right. And then we would be saying, should it be legal when you can walk around with lots of stuff underneath you?
How do you know it's a woman?
Yeah, that's a good point. How do you even know it's a woman?
Yeah, we had that trouble in our own society.
That's right. Yes.
They're like 15 years old.
And determining the law, so to speak. Are there people in the Islamic religion in the different areas or countries who have that right or authority to proclaim what is commanded?
Yeah, there's something like a scribe. I think it's called ulama, and these are legal scholars. The legal scholars are the ones that wrestle with the implications of the law and how things get interpreted. I could have spelled that wrong, but it's something like ulama. Yeah, and they certainly have that. And they have as many arguments as the scribes and Pharisees had. Definitely. Let us go on. We're going to get to the things you mentioned, though, in terms of radical fundamentalists down the road. Death and eternal life. According to Islamic tradition, the dead are carefully wrapped in white linen or cotton, much like pilgrims going to Mecca, symbolizing complete dedication to God. A casket is not generally used in Islamic countries. Did you know that? That was kind of interesting. And they are buried facing Mecca. When God created humans, He equipped them with a sense of responsibility. They are to lead their lives in obedience to God's order, for they are intended to be God's representatives. They're caliphs on earth.
Are they buried vertically?
I don't know that question. You might have to look that up. I don't know. I'm guessing not, but yeah, I don't know.
But when you see a funeral procession on TV in this day and age of in the world, they appear to be in a wooden container.
Just a grain.
I think it probably varies widely. I just know that this has been a traditional way to bury. Yeah.
Isn't it a law like in Minnesota that you have to have, if you're buried with a casket or, you know, what happens to the, you know.
You can look it up. I don't know. Anybody know Minnesota law?
I'm just saying, you know.
I'm going to guess we need something more than a body in the ground in Minnesota.
Right.
But I don't know what it is.
That's right.
Would you look that up,
I'll try.
Diane, and let us know? It's a good question. Because that's a prime example. Now, I don't think it's required that you be buried this way. This is a customary kind of thing, probably related to the Hadiths, which probably relates to Muhammad's life and practices. You know, it was a simple life of submission. They're not putting on any kind of airs in any way. So you go to the Mecca in your Hajj that way because everybody's the same. Nobody has really fine outfits here. Everybody's the same in a white gown. Why not be buried that way too? Why not go to all of that way?